Stories at Work.
Welcome to Stories at Work. Today we're breaking down a dramatized and fictional story from the world of corporate finance, deals, and risk management. The first time I realized a slide deck could destroy people, it wasn't because of what it said. It was because of who was holding it. I was sitting in a glass conference room at 6:45 in the morning, watching my cursor blink on a title that read, Strategic Overview, Q2. While the city outside was still gray and quiet, that calm was fake. The kind of calm you get right before something expensive breaks. My job title sounded boring on LinkedIn, Director Corporate Finance Integration, but in practice I was the person who took messy truths and turned them into tidy rectangles executives could present, without sweating through their shirts. And that morning, I had one rectangle I refused to create. Not because I was scared of the truth, because I was scared of what they'd do with it. The deal on paper was beautiful. A cross-border acquisition with a headline number so large it made reporters smile. The internal mood was champagne and confidence, until you opened the diligence folder and read the parts nobody would ever tweet. There was a liability tied to the acquisition, not a rumor, not a potential risk. A documented exposure that, if it went the wrong way, could swallow roughly $2 billion, like it was lunch. And I had the emails to prove it. I'd known about it for weeks. I'd been pulled into a side meeting with legal and risk, introduced to two attorneys with the kind of calm faces that only come from seeing disasters. Up close. They didn't speak like villains. They spoke like adults. This is not for the deck, one of them said. Not yet, I thought. That's what people always mean. Because the deck was going to the one person in the building who treated information like leverage. His name was not one you'd see in Reddit stories. He wasn't Chad or Mike or Brad. His name was Varick Holt. Senior Vice President. Loud laugh, perfect suits. The kind of leader who made junior analysts feel lucky just to be noticed, then made them sick when they realized what noticed really meant. Varick didn't ask for data. He asked for ammunition. I'd seen him do it once before, months earlier, when he got his hands on a compliance note about a vendor. He didn't fix the vendor problem. He used it to erase a rival's project and take the budget for himself. After that day, the rival's desk was cleared within a week. Nobody said the word retaliation. People just started speaking softer. So when the diligence team flagged the $2 billion exposure, I did what I always did. I documented everything, saved the versions, and mapped out exactly how that liability could move through the organization if the wrong person touched it. Then I built the slides, but I left that one rectangle out. I didn't delete the information. I didn't bury it. I put it where it belonged, inside a restricted appendix with a distribution list that did not include Varick Holt. And I told myself it was temporary. Just until the right meeting. Just until the right structure. That's what responsible people say right before someone else forces the timeline. At 8:52, my calendar pinged. Pre-read review, Varick Holt. I hadn't accepted it. I hadn't been asked. It was just there. A blue block on my day like a bruise. The meeting time, 9:15. The location, boardroom, 3A. I stared at it for a second, then opened the invite details. Attendees, Varick, his chief of staff. One person from HR business partnering. And for some reason, someone from internal audit, whose name I didn't recognize. That last one made my stomach tighten. Audit doesn't sit in pre-read reviews, not unless there's a reason. My phone buzzed a second later with a text from my analyst, Kestrel Morrow. Sharp, quiet, never dramatic. He pulled the deck from the shared drive. He's already in it. I didn't answer right away. I opened our shared folder and checked access logs the way you check a door lock at night, hoping you're paranoid, fearing you're not. There it was. Time stamp. Varick's account. Opened. Downloaded. He had the deck. He just didn't have that slide. A sane person would think that meant I was safe. But sane people don't understand how executives react when they realize someone controlled the story before they could. I stood up slowly, adjusted my badge lanyard, and took my laptop with me like it was evidence. As I walked down the corridor toward boardroom 3A, I felt something odd, not panic, but clarity, because I knew exactly what he was going to say the second he noticed the missing piece. He was going to make it sound like a mistake. Then he was going to make it sound like incompetence. And if I didn't handle it right, he was going to make it sound like sabotage. I reached the double doors. Through the frosted glass, I could see silhouettes inside, moving, taking seats, the faint gestures of people getting ready to perform. At 9:17 sharp, my phone buzzed again. A new text, this time from an unknown number. One sentence. "You're about to embarrass yourself. Bring the full version." I stared at that screen for a beat, then slid the phone in my pocket, because that message didn't scare me. It confirmed what I already knew. Someone on the inside had chosen a side, and I wasn't going to be the person caught unprepared. I pushed open the boardroom doors with a calm face, walked in like I belonged there, and placed my laptop on the table. Varick Holt looked up at me and smiled, too friendly, too polished. "Morning," he said. "Quick question before we start." He tapped the printed deck in front of him with one finger. Then he leaned back in his chair like a judge who already made up his mind. "Where's the part you didn't want me to see?" And then the room went quiet in the specific way it does when everyone realizes this meeting isn't about slides anymore. It's about control. But that was just the beginning. He didn't yell. That's what made it worse. Varick Holt just tapped the printed deck with one finger, looked straight at me, and smiled like the room belonged to him. "Where's the part you didn't want me to see?" For a second, nobody moved. Not his chief of staff, not the HR partner, not the internal audit guy who was pretending he was just there to take notes. I kept my face neutral and clicked my laptop awake. "I didn't remove anything," I said. "I controlled distribution." Varick's smile thinned. Same sentence in a nicer suit. He slid his copy across the table toward me, like he was pushing a bill I needed to pay. "We have a leadership sync at 10. The CEO wants confidence. The street wants confidence. So you're going to give me the full version, and you're going to do it now." I could feel the trap. If I complied, he'd weaponize it. If I refused, he'd paint me as obstructive in front of HR and audit. So I went with the third option. "The full version exists," I said, still calm, "but it's restricted for a reason." Varick leaned forward. "And I'm the reason?" "You're a risk factor," I said, not loud, not dramatic, just clinical. That landed in the room like a dropped glass. The HR partner's pen paused mid-scratch. The audit guy looked up for the first time, eyes flicking between us like he'd just heard the keyword he came for. Varick's expression didn't change much, but his eyes did. He wasn't offended. He was calculating. "Okay," he said softly. "Let's be adults. Explain it to me." I didn't give him the satisfying version. I gave him the boring corporate version, the one that makes bullies impatient. "There's an exposure tied to the acquisition," I said. "If it's mishandled, it triggers disclosures earlier than planned. That affects price, leverage, and potentially our ability to close." Varick nodded like he already knew. "So you hid it." "I quarantined it," I corrected. He pushed back his chair, stood and walked to the wall screen like he owned the pixels too. "You know what I think?" he said, voice smooth. "I think you've gotten attached to being the only person with the scary information." I didn't argue. I let him talk. Because people like Varick always reveal motive if you let them keep speaking. "You want to be indispensable," he continued. "The hero who saved us from the monster under the bed. You think if you control the narrative, nobody can blame you when something goes wrong." Then he turned, hands open like this was a reasonable conversation. "But I'm not asking you for permission. I'm informing you how this is going to work." He looked at the internal audit guy. "Tell him." The audit guy cleared his throat. He wasn't young. He had that quiet posture of someone who's been in too many investigations to enjoy power anymore. Access and disclosure decisions on material items should follow established governance, he said carefully. Varick smiled. Exactly. Then he looked back at me. So you're going to forward me the restricted appendix, or we're going to document that you refused a direct instruction in a time-sensitive executive process. There it was, the pressure move, the setup. I exhaled once, slow, because this wasn't about the deal. It was about making sure I was the fall guy. I'm not refusing, I said. I'm escalating. Varick blinked. To who? To the people who signed the restrictions, I said. Legal and risk. If they approve adding you to distribution, you get it. If they don't, you don't. Varick's jaw tightened. We don't have time for your process theater. We don't have time for an uncontrolled leak, I replied. The HR partner finally spoke, trying to sound neutral. Is there a reason you believe this could leak? I didn't look at HR. I looked at Varick, because he was the reason. But instead of accusing him, I dropped something cleaner. There's already an unexplained attendee on this invite, I said, nodding slightly toward audit. And there's already pressure to bypass governance. Those are exactly the conditions where sensitive information moves in ways nobody can trace later. The audit guy's face didn't change, but his pen started writing faster. Varick realized it too. He'd expected me to fold or explode. I didn't either. He stepped closer to me, lowering his voice so it sounded like mentorship, but felt like a threat. You think you're protecting the company, he said, but what you're really doing is embarrassing me. I'm preventing a headline, I said. He held eye contact. Then he smiled again, smaller. Fine, he said. Escalate. But don't forget, when the CEO asks why he didn't see a full risk picture at 10 o'clock, I'm going to tell him it was your choice. I nodded. Then I'll tell him it was governance. Varick's smile vanished. He walked out of the boardroom without another word, and his chief of staff followed like a shadow. The door closed. The air shifted. HR looked at me like I'd just stepped onto thin ice on purpose. Audit stayed seated. Then quietly, the audit guy spoke again. What's the name of the folder where the restricted appendix lives? He asked. I didn't answer immediately, because that question meant one thing. He wasn't here to watch Varick bully me. He was here because someone already suspected Varick had been doing this before. And if I gave the wrong answer, I'd either hand them evidence or hand Varick a map. I met his eyes and said, I can show you the access log, not the contents. He nodded once, like that was the correct answer. Then he added, almost casually, Good. Because at 9:17, someone tried to request that file through an internal channel that isn't supposed to touch M&A materials. My stomach dropped, not from fear, but from confirmation. He wasn't guessing. There was already a trail, and Varick had just lit it on fire. But that was just the beginning. I left the boardroom with my laptop hugged to my chest like it was a shield. Not because I was scared of Varick Holt, because I was scared of what he was capable of doing when he stopped smiling. In the hallway, I called Kestrel Morrow back. Do not touch the deck, I said the second he picked up. Do not add him. Do not rename anything. Just watch. I'm already watching, Kestrel said. His voice stayed flat, but I could hear tension underneath it. He's not just angry. He's moving. What do you mean? Kestrel hesitated, then said it. He's trying to build a version of the truth he can control. I headed back to my floor, through the quiet corridor where the carpet ate footsteps. It was still early enough that most desks were dark, but I could already feel eyes. People sense turbulence the way animals sense weather. On my screen, I pulled up the access report again. Timestamps, user IDs, file paths. Boring to look at. Dangerous to ignore. At 9:17, someone had tried to request the restricted appendix through an internal channel that had no business being near the deal materials. The audit guy had said it like it was a casual fact. It wasn't casual. It meant somebody was probing for a path that bypassed the normal controls. And the only person who had just been blocked from the controlled path was Varick. I opened my messages to legal and risk and wrote one sentence that was true, specific, and impossible to twist. I'm receiving pressure to expand distribution on a restricted M&A appendix containing a materially sensitive exposure. Please advise in writing whether distribution should be expanded. Then I added the detail that mattered. Request originates from SVP Varick Holt. I didn't hit send yet, because there was a sick part of corporate life nobody tells you until you learn it the hard way. When you put something in writing, you don't just create protection, you create enemies. And Varick was the kind of enemy who didn't need to win fairly. My phone buzzed. Unknown number again. Your escalation is noted. Keep pushing and you will be removed from the deal. No greeting, no signature, just a warning dressed like policy. I stared at it, then took a screenshot and dropped it into my personal work journal folder, the one I'd kept since my first year in corporate finance, back when a mentor told me, "You'll forget what people said. The system won't." I finally hit send to legal and risk. Then I did something else that felt small but mattered. I opened a new document and wrote a timeline. Not an essay, not a rant, just a clean list with timestamps. Meeting invite arrived. Deck accessed. Pressure applied. Escalation initiated. Unknown messages received. It wasn't drama, it was a record. And I knew I needed it because I could already see the next step in Varick's playbook. If he couldn't get the information, he would discredit the person holding it. And he'd do it using process. At 10:10, my calendar flashed again. Urgent sync. People operations. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was textbook. I walked into the small meeting room and found two people waiting, a people ops manager I'd met once, and a finance HR partner I recognized from restructures. Their faces were polite in that way. That means they've already decided what the meeting is about. The people ops manager started with softness. "We just want to check in. There's been concern about collaboration." There it was, not fraud, not ethics, not even performance. Collaboration. It's the word they use when they want to make your refusal sound like a personality problem. "I'm collaborating," I said. "I'm following governance." The HR partner nodded sympathetically. "Of course. But we've heard you're withholding critical information from leadership." I kept my voice even. "I'm restricting distribution of material deal exposure until legal and risk approve expansion." The people ops manager glanced down at her notes, like she'd never heard the words legal or risk before in her life. "So you admit you kept information off the slides," she said. I didn't correct her phrasing. I corrected the implication. "I kept it off the broad deck," I said. "It's in a restricted appendix with controlled distribution. That's standard practice." The HR partner leaned forward slightly. "Varick said you told him he was a risk factor." I didn't deny it. I said distribution expands through governance. If that makes him feel like a risk factor, that's his interpretation. They both went still for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to understand the goal. This wasn't a check-in. This was the beginning of a file, a narrative, a pretext. The people ops manager spoke again, gentler. "Can we ask why you felt the need to take such a firm stance?" I almost answered with logic. Then I stopped myself. Because corporate punishments don't come from logic. They come from stories. And Varick was already telling one where I was the problem. So I gave them something harder to fight. "I have received anonymous messages pressuring me to bypass governance," I said. "I have retained those messages. I have the access logs, and I have escalated to legal and risk for written guidance." The HR partner's eyes flicked. "Quick. Anonymous messages?" I nodded, pulled my phone out, and placed it face down on the table. "I can provide them to legal if requested." For the first time, the people ops manager looked uncertain, because that sentence moved the conversation out of soft behavior and into potential misconduct. And people ops hates misconduct. It creates paperwork. It creates liability. It creates questions that don't go away. The HR partner cleared his throat. Let's not jump to conclusions, he said quickly. I didn't smile. I'm not, I replied. I'm documenting. Silence settled in. Then the People Ops manager said, Okay, we'll note your position. I stood up. As I reached the door, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Kestrel, one line. He just scheduled a replacement presenter for the 10 o'clock leadership sync. It's not you. I stopped walking. Because that didn't just mean I was being sidelined. It meant Varick was taking control of the deck without me. Which meant he'd present a cleaned version of the truth. And when the truth surfaced later, he would point to one person and say the same sentence. Calm and practiced. I didn't know? He never told me. That was the moment something in me shifted. Not into rage, into resolve. Because if Varick wanted to play this like a story, then I was done being a character he could write. I called Kestrel back and kept my voice low. Lock the folder, I said. Snapshot the permissions, export the access log, and do not tell anyone you did it. Kestrel didn't ask why. He just said, on it. And as I watched the clock crawl toward 10, I realized the worst part of all of it wasn't losing credit. It wasn't losing a seat at the table. It was knowing that in less than an hour, someone was going to stand up in front of leadership and sell them confidence built on a missing piece of reality. And if I didn't act carefully, they were going to make me the reason they were lied to. But that was just the beginning. By 10 o'clock, the leadership sync was already happening without me. I wasn't in the room. I wasn't even on the invite anymore. My calendar refreshed and the meeting disappeared like it had never existed. That's how corporate power works when someone decides you're inconvenient. They don't attack you in public. They remove you quietly, then act like you were never part of the work. Kestrel sent me one line. They pulled your access to the deal workspace. I can still see it. You can't. I stared at my screen until it felt like the pixels were laughing. That move wasn't about safety. It was about control. If I couldn't see the workspace, I couldn't prove what changed. If I couldn't prove what changed, the story could be rewritten. And if the story got rewritten, the blame would have somewhere clean to land. I stood up, walked to the kitchenette, poured coffee I didn't want, and kept my hands steady. Because panic makes you sloppy. And sloppiness is what people like Varick Holt feed on. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number, same cold tone. You're out. Do the smart thing and keep your mouth shut. I didn't respond. I took a screenshot, saved it into my journal folder, and then I did something I'd been avoiding all morning. I called the one person in legal who had told me, weeks ago, to treat this exposure like a loaded weapon. Her name was Malin Crow. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't posture. She spoke like a scalpel. She picked up on the second ring. Tell me it's not what I think it is, she said. It's exactly what you think, I replied. They removed my access. He's presenting without the restricted appendix. And I'm getting anonymous pressure messages. There was a pause. Short, sharp, dangerous. Forward me the screenshots, Malin said, and send me the access logs. I can't pull logs anymore, I said. They cut my access. Then who can? She asked. Kestrel, I said. He's still in. Good, she replied. Do not tell him to break policy. Do not ask him to access content he shouldn't. But if he can export access history that he is authorized to view, he should do it now. I felt my shoulders loosen a fraction, not because the problem was solved, but because someone serious had taken the wheel. Then Malin added, quiet and precise, and do not confront Varick again. You're past that stage. I hung up and texted Kestrel. One thing, export access history for the deal workspace and permissions change history. If you can do it without opening restricted contents, do it. Then send directly to Malin Crow in legal. Kestrel replied almost instantly. Already exported. I saw a permissions change at 9:58. It was made by Varick's chief of staff. My jaw tightened. That timestamp was before the 10 o'clock meeting, meaning they planned it. They didn't react to me. They planned around me. Kestrel sent another message. Also, Someone tried to access the restricted appendix through a service account, not a person. I sat down slowly. Because service accounts don't get curious, service accounts get used. My mind ran through how it would work. You create a justification. You request temporary elevated access. For business continuity, you use a back-channel IT process. Then you pull the file under an account nobody associates with Varick. And if anybody asks later, you shrug and say it was automated. It was clean. It was cowardly. It was exactly what I expected. I forwarded Kestrel's export to Malin. Then I opened my journal timeline and added one sentence. Permissions changed by Chief of Staff before meeting. Attempt via service account. At 11:13, an email hit my inbox from People Operations. Subject line, temporary reassignment of duties. I didn't need to open it to know what it said, but I opened it anyway because you don't win these fights by refusing to look. It was polite language covering a knife. They were moving me off the work stream to reduce friction and support executive alignment. The message ended with a line that made my teeth grind. Please refrain from independent outreach related to the transaction. Independent outreach? As if legal and risk were my neighbors and I was bothering them at dinner? My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Malin. I have the exports, she said. I also just spoke to internal audit. I sat up. You spoke to them? They were already watching, she replied. The service account attempt triggered an alert. Someone tried to suppress the alert trail. My skin went cold. Suppressing alerts is not aggressive leadership. It's misconduct. It's the moment the game stops being political and starts being legal, Malin continued. Listen carefully. You are not to do anything emotional. Are not to expose anything. You are going to do one thing. Preserve evidence and follow counsel. I swallowed. What about the 10 o'clock meeting? What did he present? I know, she said. He presented a sanitized risk summary. He implied there were no material exposures beyond routine integration risk. I stared at the wall. $2 billion reduced to routine integration risk. That wasn't spin. That was deception. Malin's voice stayed calm. And that's why I'm calling. Because we are placing the transaction materials under legal hold. Effective immediately. Legal hold. Those two words have weight. They mean nobody deletes anything. Nobody cleans up. Nobody rewrites history without leaving fingerprints. And one more thing, Malin said. I waited. The CEO's office just asked why a director of integration finance was removed from the workstream mid-morning, she said. They didn't ask Varick. They asked me. For the first time all day, I felt something like a small, sharp satisfaction. Not victory, not revenge, just the beginning of consequences. Malin's tone hardened. You're going to receive a meeting invite soon, she said. It will include the CEO, General Counsel, and Head of Internal Audit. My throat tightened. Today? Yes, she said. And Varick will be there. He thinks this is still politics. It's not. I looked at the clock on my monitor. 12:27. I imagined Varick in some corner office, still smiling, still believing he could out-narrate reality. I imagined his chief of staff changing permissions with a few clicks, thinking that was control. I imagined the service account attempt, like a gloved hand reaching into a locked drawer. And I realized something else, something quieter, but deeper. The reason I'd kept that detail off the slides wasn't because I wanted power. It was because I knew exactly what kind of people would reach for it when they thought nobody was watching. Now somebody was watching, and at 9:17 he'd learned why. But he still didn't understand the worst part. The system remembers, and the hold was already in place. That night, I stopped being polite. The meeting invite hit at 1:42. No subject line, no agenda, just a block of time, a conference room on the executive floor, and a list of names that made my pulse slow down instead of spike, because once you see these names together, you understand the game has changed. General Counsel, Head of Internal Audit, CFO, CEO, and then almost as an afterthought, Varick Holt. I arrived early, not because I wanted to look eager, but because I wanted to control what I could control. My posture, my breathing, my facts. I brought nothing dramatic, no speeches, no printed gotcha packets. Just my laptop, my journal timeline, and the screenshots of the anonymous messages. The conference room smelled like expensive coffee and quiet consequences. Floor-to-ceiling glass, thick carpet, a long table that made everyone sit a little farther apart than they needed to. Varick walked in last. He came in smiling like this was a misunderstanding he'd charm his way through. He nodded at the CEO like they were teammates. He glanced at me like I was a minor inconvenience that had gotten too much attention. He sat down and folded his hands. The CEO, Saravan Pike, a man with tired eyes and the kind of stillness that makes entire departments recalibrate, didn't return the smile. He looked at General Counsel, then at Audit. "Start," Saravan said. The head of Internal Audit, Orlin Voss, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "At 9:17 this morning," Orlin said, "a restricted appendix related to the transaction was requested through a channel not authorized for M&A materials. The request originated from a service account." Varick's smile held, but it became thinner, like someone trying to keep a door closed with one finger. Orlin continued. "At 9:58, permissions were altered on the deal workspace. The change was made by an executive assistant account associated with your office." Varick finally spoke, still calm. "My chief of staff handles logistics," he said. "If there was a permissions change, it would have been to ensure continuity. We were facing a time-critical leadership sink. That's normal." Orlin didn't argue. He just slid a printed page across the table. Slow. "Here are the access events," he said, "and here is the attempt to suppress the alert record that fired when the service account accessed restricted pathways." The word suppress changed the room, because continuity is a business reason. Suppressing alerts is a different category. Varick's eyes flicked, quick, to General Counsel. Malin Crowe didn't blink. "Before we discuss intent," she said, "we need to address what was presented to leadership at 10. The CFO, Darian Quell, a careful man who always looked like he was thinking in spreadsheets, finally spoke. "The risk summary presented this morning stated there were no material exposures beyond routine integration risk," Darian said. He looked at Varick. "Is that accurate?" Varick didn't hesitate. "It reflected what we could responsibly share at that time," he said. "We shouldn't be spooking leadership with worst-case hypotheticals." I watched the CEO's face. No explosion, no theatrics, just a slow narrowing of attention. Orlin Voss turned his head slightly toward me, not as a cue to speak emotionally, but as permission to place reality on the table. I opened my laptop and slid it toward General Counsel first, not the CEO. That mattered. "I escalated governance this morning," I said. "I retained the messages I received pressuring me to bypass it, and I documented my timeline." Malin took my laptop, scanned the journal entries, then the screenshots. She didn't react. She simply forwarded them to Orlin and the CFO. Varick leaned back slightly, like he was watching a play he didn't believe in. Then Saravan Pike spoke again, voice quiet. "You were removed from the workstream mid-morning," he said to me. "Why?" I answered with facts. "Because I refuse to expand distribution of a restricted appendix containing a material exposure without written approval from legal and risk," I said. "Because I'd seen sensitive information used as leverage before. And because this morning someone tried to bypass controls with a service account." Varick exhaled, almost amused. "This is a lot of theater for a deck," he said. "We're all on the same side here." Malin's voice cut through the room like a clean line on paper. "Then you will have no issue with the legal hold," she said. "No issue with forensic preservation of your devices. No issue with audit interviewing your chief of staff and the administrators tied to the service account." Varick's smile finally cracked. Are you seriously implying I did something improper? He asked. Orlin Voss answered instead of Malin. We don't imply, he said. We verify. And then he did something that felt almost unfair in its simplicity. He looked at Varick and asked one question. Why did your office need the restricted appendix before governance approval, if your position was that leadership shouldn't be spooked by worst-case risk? Silence. It wasn't the awkward kind. It was the kind where everyone hears the truth arrive before anyone says it. Varick opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes moved, fast, like he was searching for a version of reality that didn't trap him. The CFO spoke next, tone flat. Because if you had that appendix, Darian said, you could control when and how the exposure surfaced. You could brief selectively. You could protect the price narrative. And if it came out later, you could say you never knew. Varick's face hardened. That's speculation, he said. Orlin slid another page forward. This is not, he replied. It was a calendar entry, a meeting invite from 2 weeks earlier, on a day I'd been pulled into a separate diligence call. I hadn't known the invite existed because I wasn't on it. The attendees included Varick, his chief of staff, and an external advisory firm. The subject line was short and ugly. Messaging plan for deal exposure. Varick's throat moved once. Malin looked at the CEO. At minimum, she said, we have governance bypass, attempted suppression of alerts, and a material misrepresentation in executive messaging. We also have retaliation indicators tied to the removal of an employee from a work stream after refusing improper instruction. The CEO didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Varick, he said, stand up. Varick blinked. Excuse me? Stand up, Sir Evan repeated. Varick stood, slow, still trying to keep his posture confident. The CEO nodded toward the door. Security will escort you to your office, Sir Evan said. You will not access systems. You will not communicate with staff about this transaction. Your devices will be imaged. Your chief of staff will be interviewed within the hour. Varick's face shifted. Anger first, then a flash of disbelief. You're doing this based on one guy's notes? He snapped, looking at me. The CEO's expression didn't change. No, Saravan said. I'm doing it based on audit logs, legal hold. And the fact that you presented a risk posture that doesn't match the evidence. Varick's jaw worked like he was chewing words he couldn't swallow. Then he did what people like him always do when the room stops admiring them. He tried to bargain. You need me, he said. I'm the one who can keep this deal on track. Darian Quell, the CFO, replied without looking at him. We need the deal to survive the truth, he said, not survive your version of it. Security arrived. 2 quiet professionals who didn't look impressed by titles. Varick looked at the CEO one last time, like he expected a wink, a signal, a rescue. He got none. As he was escorted out, the room stayed calm. No victory laps, no cheers, just adults doing what they should have done earlier. When the door closed, Saravan Pike turned to me. You kept it off the slides, he said. Why? I answered honestly, and it surprised even me how steady my voice was. Because I didn't trust what would happen to the truth once it was portable, I said. And because if it was going to surface, I wanted it to surface through governance, so the company could respond, not spin. The CEO nodded once. Then Malin added, almost like an afterthought. But it mattered. You're reinstated on the work stream, she said. And your reassignment email is being rescinded in writing. Audit will handle the retaliation angle. Orlin Voss closed his folder. And for the record, he said, looking at me, your decision at 9:17 preserved the chain of custody. If you had sent it, you would have polluted the evidence. I sat back slightly, letting that land. Not pride, relief. Because the ending I wanted was never Varick suffering. It was control returning to the system. It was the company being forced to face what was true while there was still time to act. That afternoon, the leadership team received an updated risk brief, complete, governed, and honest. The deal didn't collapse. It adjusted. Terms shifted. Protections were added. The exposure got priced into reality instead of buried under confidence. And Barrick, he didn't get to rewrite the story because the system remembered what he tried to erase. That's the lesson I took from the whole thing. And it's the one I keep repeating in my head whenever someone in a suit tells me to just make it look clean. If someone is pressuring you to bypass process, it's rarely because the process is slow. It's because the process is the only thing that stops them. What do you think about this case? Let me know in the comments on Stories at Work. Have you ever been in a situation where leadership tried to cut corners and rewrite risk to fit a convenient narrative? What would you have done in my place? Handed over the file for the sake of peace, or documented everything through logs, access records, and formal approvals? If you enjoy stories where control is taken back, not with shouting, but with documentation and process, please support the video with a like and subscribe to Stories at Work.